Cinema 4D's Mograph toolset is a game changer when it comes to procedurally animating objects quickly and easily. In this video, I'm going to cover Mograph Effectors and how they can quickly apply animation to our 3D artwork. Now before I begin though, the features I'm going to be utilizing in this video must first be unlocked by registering your Cinema 4D Lite version. By registering, you can activate 3 free Mograph Effectors which are otherwise only available in Cinema 4D Broadcast or Studio. With the Plane Effector and the Random Effector and Fracture Object, you can create 3D procedural simulations with very little effort. So to be able to have our objects here be affected by effectors, we must first place them in a container device called a Fracture Object, which you can grab right here. In this Fracture Object, you can see we have this Effectors menu here. This is basically built to pass on any animation attributes from any effectors on down to its children objects. So let's go ahead and grab all the objects we want to actually animate with effectors and just drag and drop them underneath our Fracture Object, making them children. We can actually get rid of that null object we had containing all those objects, so I'll just delete that. So now we have our Fracture Object and we have all of our objects as children underneath them. Now we can start applying effectors and animating these objects. So there are 2 very useful effectors that come in Cinema 4D Lite. The first of which is the Plane Effector that allows you to apply plain old position, scale, and rotation based animation to your objects, as well as the Random Effector that can add randomness to these animations. So I'm going to grab a Plane Effector, and since I had my Fracture Object selected while I selected that Plane Effector, it's going to automatically apply to my object. Conversely, we can just delete that and we can add effectors by just drag and dropping into this Effectors menu. And you're going to notice when I applied that Plane Effector, all of our objects just kind of jumped up. And that is because by default, we have position enabled under the transform parameters in the Plane Effector that is pushing our objects up in the Y 100 centimeters. So to animate these value changes in position, scale, and rotation, we can do one of 2 things. We can just simply go to the Effector tab and just keyframe the strength, and that globally affects how much of that Plane Effector movement is applied to all of our objects all at once. Or we can go into the Fall Off tab and actually use a Fall Off to animate visually. Now I'm going to go ahead, and our shape is infinite right now, so it's going to affect all of our objects the same exact way all at once. I'm going to use a linear fall off, and I'm also going to have it point upwards. And I'm just going to pull this off to the side. You can see what a fall off looks like. So this is sort of like a text animation range selector in After Effects. Basically what you can do is just visually animate by dragging the fall off through your objects linearly. So if I move this back over here, you can see as my fall off moves downward, it's not affecting any of my objects, but as I move this effector fall off up, it then applies that animation, which is simply just that position change in the Y. So what we can actually do is apply more transform parameters here, and we can enable scale. I'm just going to click on uniform scaling just so we can scale down in the X, Y, and Z uniformly. And I'm just going to put in a value of -1, and that's going to scale down all of our objects to nothing. So now what we can do is we can pass our fall off through our objects, and you're going to notice as I pass this down, it's actually going to return our objects to 100% scale and back to their original starting position. So you can see that our fall off's actually working backwards, because you can see our fall off's facing up. But as I move this backwards, we're going to return all of our objects back to its normal state because our fall off totally passed through it. So what we can do is move our fall off up, and we can actually keyframe our fall off. So we're going to go to our coordinates, and we just need to animate in the Y. So I'm just going to set a keyframe by clicking this circle until it turns red. That's going to create a keyframe on our timeline. And I'm just gonna click and drag our playhead and move it to about frame 35, and just click that circle again, and that'll create another keyframe. But first, we actually need to move this down. So we'll move this all the way down, and then record that keyframe. And we will hit play and see what we got. Actually, I'm going to trim our timeline to about 40 frames so we can just concentrate on those frames. And you can see that we just created an animation. It's very choppy right now, and this is due to the fact that because we are applying this visually, our animation takes place in between these 3 planes. So our animation has to happen within a very fast time frame because of the fact that this fall off is so narrow. So what we can do is just increase the scale of our fall off, and we can see that that kind of smooths things out a little bit. But actually what's happening is you can see we have these 3 planes, and as I go into my fall off tab right here, you can see we have this fall off, and there's 50% in this field. So what actually happens is you can see as I move this fall off percent up and down, it's moving that red plane right here. Basically what's happening is that this is only making the animation occur between this top yellow plane and that red plane. So that's why it's still actually happening very quickly. The animation's still happening very fast. So what I can do to smooth this out even more is just cranking our fall off all the way up to 100%. So now we have this full height of our effector to have the animation applied to our object. So now if I hit play, you'll see this is a much smoother, more gradual type of animation application to all of our objects. And that actually feels pretty good. What I'm going to do now is go to my timeline by going to Window, Timeline, and you can see we have our animation track here. And I'm just going to twirl down my position track, and you'll see that by default we have a easy ease on our animation curve. And for effectors, I don't need any easy easing, so I'm just going to grab my 2 keyframes on my track and go to this button right here. This is the linear interpolation button. I'm just going to hit that, and that's going to remove our easy ease and just make this linear interpolation. So we don't have any more easing anymore. So if I hit play, you can see that's just a more linear kind of fall off flow, and that actually looks pretty good. I can actually speed this up a little bit more by clicking and dragging that keyframe and moving it to frame 30, and that's looking pretty good. So what I want to do now is add a little bit more dynamic movement to this and add a little bit of overshoot to my animation. So we can do this within the effector by going to the plane effector here, going into the fall off, and going to the spline field. Now, using this spline field, we can almost create our own animation curve and define how these plane effector values, how these animation values are applied across the span of the fall off. So what I can do is make a little overshoot kind of animation curve. So to create points on this spline editor, I'm going to hold Command and click and move this down, and Command click again to make a animation curve here. Now this isn't going to do a whole lot right now, but what we actually need to do is make a little overshoot curve. So what I'm going to do is just grab this Bezier handle and just create a little bit of overshoot, because this is basically 0% strength and this is 100% strength. So as I move this curve up above that 100% strength, basically we're just increasing the strength of the plane effector's movements that are being applied to our objects over that 100%. So let me just hit play. You're actually going to notice that this is happening in reverse. We actually have this little springiness happening at the very start, and this is because our fall off is facing upwards. And remember, we're basically working this fall off in reverse because it's facing upwards, and we're actually backing into our objects and removing the effects of the plane effector. So we actually made this animation curve wrong. We actually need to do this reverse. So what I'm going to do is grab this Bezier handle and move it back to its original position, and I'm just going to reverse this and make the overshoot down here. Now if I hit play, you're going to see that now we actually have our overshoot happening in the correct direction because of the fact, again, we're backing up our fall off in the opposite direction. So this adds a really nice overshoot type of animation to all of our objects. It adds a little springiness to this animation. It looks really, really nice. So what if I want to actually randomize the timing of how the plane effector applies the animation values to these objects? Well, we can do this by adding a random effector. So again, I'm going to make sure I have my fracture object selected and just go up to my Mograph menu and just apply a random effector. And that's going to apply some random values in the position X, Y, and Z by default. So I'm actually not going to want to randomize any of the position, scale, or rotation values. What I actually want to do is randomize the timing or the strength of how that plane effector is applying those animation values to all of my objects. So the first thing I need to do is go to my fracture object, go into the effectors list. I actually need to do some rearranging of how my effector stack is ordered. So just like an effect stack in After Effects where the effect on the top is applied to your layer first, and then any other effects are applied after it in a progression from top to bottom, it's the same thing with effectors. So if I want to give random values to an object and then have that drive and offset the animation caused by the plane effector, I need to click and drag and make this random effector affect our objects first before it gets affected by the plane effector. So if I go to my random effector here, we have this weight transform. Now by utilizing this weight transform strength, we can add random values to randomly offset the timing of the animation so it's less uniform. So let me just hit play and I'll demonstrate exactly what the weight transform does. So I'm going to just crank up my weight transform to 50. And you can see that already our animation is not so linear anymore. We have a lot of offsetting of all of the animation that's being applied by that plane effector. So some objects will be affected faster than others due to introducing these random noise or turbulence values to that linear fall off of the plane effector. So I can crank this up very high and make this very, very random. And you can see that we actually need to push our plane effector down further to actually encompass all of our objects. So let me actually go into my front view and make sure this goes all the way down, because what's happening is due to my random effector, we're actually adding random values in the positive and the negative. So because of that, we actually need to push our plane effector down even further so that randomized noise can fully pass through our object. So I'm going to go ahead, and since we moved our plane effector's fall off down even further, I need to record a new keyframe. And we can go back to our parameters here. Go full screen on our perspective view. And this is a little bit too random. I think with the weight transform, a little bit goes a long way. So what I'm going to do is maybe bring this down to, let's try 20 and see how that looks. So that adds just a little bit of random time offset to make this animation look way more interesting than it would without it. So this is without the random. So we just got a very linear progression, and this is with random. So it just adds a little bit more interest, a little bit more pleasing to the eye to add that little bit of organic randomness to our animation. Makes it a little bit more interesting. So you can easily see how powerful and easy to use the Mograph effector workflow is inside of Cinema 4D Lite. By setting up just a couple of keyframes, you can create a really complex animation. And by using the spline editor in the plane effector, we can edit and apply a custom animation curve perfect for precise easing or overshoot.